Welcome to Finance Made Easy. Today, I'm going to share with you the second theorem of finance, the aggregation of capital. Yesterday, we discussed how humans are constrained by time. But aside from time, what's the other biggest constraint we face? It's the constraint of capital. In economics, we call this scarcity. However, think about it. Human capital constraints don't happen every moment, every day. But rather, we face critical moments when we need large sums of money all at once. For example, in your personal life, things like getting married, buying a house, falling ill, or studying abroad. At these junctures, we urgently need to gather a large amount of funds. The same applies to businesses, especially during the startup phase, research and development investments, or project launches. At every crucial stage of development, we rely heavily on large sums of capital. But what about even grander events? For example, the outcomes of wars or the rise and fall of cities. Surely these aren't unrelated to finance, right? Don't they also require the aggregation of capital? Today I'll tell you two short stories that will show you how the more grand an event is, the more it demands the rapid aggregation and effective allocation of capital, and finance is the only tool that can make that happen. The first story is about the American Civil War. As the only civil war in U.S. history, the North won decisively, abolished slavery, and completely changed the course of American history. But what you might not know is that behind this great war was a battle of finance. At the start of the war, the Northern armies suffered many setbacks, and the funds for the war began to run low. The federal government had to raise a large amount of long-term capital quickly, or it wouldn't be able to sustain the military expenses. So, the Treasury decided to issue $500 million in bonds. But at that time, with the military situation so grim, no bankers were willing to purchase the bonds, and the Northern government found itself in a very passive position. At this point, a banker from Philadelphia, named Cook, stepped forward. He proposed a new approach. Instead of selling bonds to the wealthy financial magnates, he turned to ordinary American families. Here's what he did. To make bonds accessible to ordinary families, he persuaded the Treasury to lower the face value of bonds, all the way down to $50. He hired a large number of financial intermediaries to sell bonds in rural areas, the Midwest and the West, carrying out a massive grassroots sales campaign. He launched a major publicity campaign, communicating through media and pamphlets that buying bonds was a patriotic act and an investment win-win. On one hand, the bonds would pay 6% interest, tax-free. On the other hand, if the North won, the bonds would increase in value, and bondholders could share in the victory. This sales strategy was incredibly successful. Within a year, Cook had raised $400 million for the Northern government, which was immediately converted into food, military supplies, and medicine, all sent directly to the battlefield. At the same time, the South was also running low on funds. Their military supplies were lagging, and the Army's combat effectiveness began to decline. In the famous novel Gone with the Wind, there's a scene where Southern soldiers are underfed and poorly clothed. At this time, the South made a disastrous financial decision to raise funds for the war. They printed $1.7 billion in banknotes in 1 year. These notes flooded into the Southern market, causing massive inflation, and the Southern economy collapsed rapidly. What does this story tell us? The efficiency of capital aggregation ultimately determines the comparison of military power. So, behind the victory of the North was the power of finance. No wonder a Southern general later said, "We didn't lose to the Northern soldiers. We lost to Northern finance." Now that you know the outcome of the Civil War was determined by the efficiency of capital aggregation, what about the rise and fall of cities? Today, everyone knows that New York is the world's largest city, but in the 19th century, it was just a small, obscure port town. The miraculous rise of New York was largely thanks to the Erie Canal. Before the canal was built, Shipping 1 ton of flour from the west to the east cost $120 and took 3 weeks, as it had to navigate the Mississippi River. After the canal was completed, the transport time dropped to 8 days, and the cost fell to just $6. This created a vital transportation link between the east and west coasts. By the mid-19th century, New York's incoming freight volume skyrocketed, capturing 62% of the entire U.S. freight market, and its population surged from over 100,000 to over 1 million. Historians often say that New York's miracle was really the miracle of the Erie Canal. But what you might not know is that the power behind the canal was also finance. While building the canal seemed like a great idea, the first problem was money. The estimated cost was $7 million, which is about $200 million today. At the time, the U.S. government's annual revenue was only $22 million, so it was impossible for the federal government to support such a project. The public didn't know whether the canal would benefit them, and they were unwilling to pay taxes to support it, so the project seemed doomed. At this critical moment, Wall Street bankers stepped in. They said, "We'll help New York State issue bonds for the Erie Canal." Because the success of the canal wasn't guaranteed, they proposed a financial innovation issuing bonds in installments. The first round of funds was used to build the first section of the canal. These bonds were the first ever infrastructure bonds issued by Wall Street, and also the first municipal bonds officially recorded in U.S. history. At that time, Wall Street's powerful sales network played a huge role. The first batch of bonds was sold out quickly and spread across both U.S. and European markets. $1 million in funds came through, and construction began on schedule. 2 years later, the first section of the canal opened to great success, generating $250,000 in revenue that year. This success quickly fueled investor enthusiasm, and Erie Canal bonds were in high demand. Funds poured in, speeding up the project. By 1825, the entire canal was open, and more than 10,000 ships used it that year. Domestic and international trade flowed into New York, which rapidly became the trade and financial center of the U.S. East Coast and even the world. Just like with the Civil War, what we see is the miracle of New York's prosperity. But behind this miracle is also the power of finance. Without modern financial tools and markets, large-scale capital aggregation across regions and time would have been unimaginable. This is Finance Made Easy, helping you gain a higher perspective and re-understand wealth.